My name is Darius, and I was a Hoover criminal who planned and executed what became known as the Great Compton Massacre, the most devastating gang ambush in Los Angeles history that left 20 Bloods dead in a single coordinated attack. What I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core, because it's not just about gang violence. It's about how I spent 6 months planning a military-style operation that turned a routine drug meeting into a slaughter that changed gang warfare forever. On November 12, 1999, I led 40 Hoover criminals in an ambush so perfectly executed that our enemies never had a chance to fight back, never saw us coming, and never understood what hit them until it was too late. If you think you understand what gang warfare looks like, if you think you know what it means to plan the perfect attack, you're about to learn why that night in Compton became the blueprint for gang ambushes across the country. The massacre I orchestrated didn't just eliminate our enemies. It traumatized an entire community, triggered a war that lasted 5 years, and taught me that some victories are so devastating they destroy the victor along with the defeated. Before we go deeper, let me be absolutely clear about why I'm sharing this story. I'm not here to glorify violence or make myself sound like some kind of tactical genius. I'm here to warn you about what happens when gang warfare evolves from street fights into military operations, when young men with no understanding of consequences are given the power to plan and execute mass violence. For 8 years, I was a strategic planner for the Hoover criminals, responsible for coordinating attacks against rival gangs throughout south-central Los Angeles. I thought I was a military strategist, using my intelligence and planning abilities to give my set decisive advantages over our enemies. I was wrong about everything. I wasn't a military strategist. I was a terrorist who planned mass murder and called it warfare. I wasn't giving my set advantages. I was escalating conflicts to levels that made everyone less safe and more likely to die violent deaths. I wasn't coordinating attacks. I was orchestrating massacres that destroyed families, traumatized communities, and turned neighborhoods into war zones. The Great Compton Massacre wasn't a victory. It was the beginning of a cycle of revenge that consumed everything I cared about and taught me that violence only creates more violence, death only creates more death, and war only creates more war. I grew up in South Central during the height of the crack epidemic, when gang membership offered one of the few paths to respect, protection, and financial stability for young black men. My father was serving a life sentence for murder, and my mother struggled to raise 4 children while working minimum wage jobs that barely covered rent and food. The Hoover criminals weren't just a gang in our neighborhood. They were the dominant force that controlled territory, settled disputes, and provided economic opportunities that didn't exist in the legitimate world. I joined when I was 14. But unlike most recruits who started as lookouts or street soldiers, I was identified early as having strategic thinking abilities that could be valuable to the organization. My teachers had always said I was smart, that I could analyze complex problems and develop creative solutions. But those same abilities that might have taken me to college instead made me valuable to a criminal organization that needed someone who could outthink their enemies. The older members began training me in tactical planning, intelligence gathering, and the coordination of complex operations involving multiple teams and objectives. I thought this role made me important and respected, but it actually made me the most dangerous person in my own community. The role of a strategic planner in gang warfare is unlike any other position in the organization. While soldiers fight and dealers generate revenue, planners are responsible for thinking several moves ahead, anticipating enemy actions, and developing operations that will give their set decisive advantages in ongoing conflicts. The job requires the ability to gather and analyze intelligence, coordinate multiple teams across wide geographic areas, and most importantly, to think about human beings as chess pieces that can be moved, sacrificed, and eliminated to achieve strategic objectives. You have to be able to study your enemies for months, learning their habits and routines, their strengths and weaknesses, their relationships and loyalties, and then use that knowledge to plan their destruction. You have to understand psychology, logistics, timing, and the technical aspects of weapons and tactics. Most dangerously, you have to be able to make decisions about life and death without feeling the emotional weight of those choices, treating murder as just another tool in your strategic toolkit. I thought I was perfect for this role because I was naturally analytical and could separate emotions from tactical necessities. What I didn't understand was that the emotional detachment required for strategic planning would eventually cut me off from my own humanity, making it impossible to see the people I was targeting as anything more than the problems to be solved through violence. My reputation as a strategic planner grew throughout the Crip Nation during my first 4 years in the role. I was credited with planning over 50 successful operations against rival blood sets, including drive-by shootings, home invasions, and coordinated attacks that eliminated key enemy personnel while minimizing casualties among our own forces. The precision of my planning and the success rate of my operations made me a legend in the gang world. Other Crip sets began requesting my assistance with their own conflicts, and even some blood sets tried to recruit me by offering enormous sums of money for my services. The Hoover criminal leadership used my reputation as a psychological weapon, letting it be known that anyone who crossed our set would become a target for the most effective tactical planner in Los Angeles. The fear I generated was more valuable than the actual operations I planned, because it made our enemies cautious and defensive, always worried about when and how we might strike. But with that reputation came increasing pressure to plan larger and more complex operations, more devastating attacks that would demonstrate our superiority over all rival organizations. The leadership began to see me as capable of solving any problem through violence, and they started pushing for operations that would require levels of coordination and brutality that I had never attempted before. The planning phase for the Great Compton Massacre began 8 months before the actual attack, when intelligence reached our leadership that the Fruittown, Peru Bloods were planning a major expansion into Hoover criminal territory that would involve taking over our most profitable drug corners and eliminating our key personnel. The Fruittown Pirates were one of the most powerful blood sets in Los Angeles, with over 200 active members and connections to Mexican cartels that gave them access to high-quality drugs and military-grade weapons. Traditional gang warfare tactics would not be effective against such a large and well-equipped enemy, so the decision was made to eliminate their entire leadership structure in a single coordinated attack that would decapitate the organization and prevent any possibility of expansion into our territory. I was chosen to plan the operation because of my track record and strategic abilities, but I was also given resources and support that I had never had access to before. Unlimited funding for intelligence gathering and equipment, a team of 40 specialists, and 8 months to plan every detail of the most ambitious attack in Los Angeles gang history. The operation would require a level of coordination and violence that had never been attempted in gang warfare, and success would establish the Hoover criminals as the dominant force in South Central, while eliminating our most dangerous enemies. The intelligence gathering phase of the operation took 4 months of careful surveillance and infiltration to identify the targets, their habits, and the perfect opportunity for a coordinated attack. We placed informants within the Fruittown, Peru organization, conducted round-the-clock surveillance of their key personnel, and monitored their communications to understand their operational patterns and security measures. The breakthrough came when we learned that the entire Fruittown, Peru leadership would be attending a birthday party for one of their founding members at a warehouse in Compton that they used for large gatherings and business meetings. The party was scheduled for November 12, 1999, and intelligence indicated that over 20 high-ranking members would be present, including their top leadership, their most experienced soldiers, and several allied gang members from other blood sets. The warehouse was located in neutral territory, making it accessible to our forces without crossing heavily defended enemy turf. Most importantly, the party was scheduled to last from 10 p.m. until dawn, giving us a 6-hour window to position our forces and execute the attack when our targets would be relaxed, possibly intoxicated, and completely unprepared for a coordinated assault. The opportunity was perfect. Too perfect, as I would later realize. The tactical planning for the Great Compton Massacre was the most complex operation I had ever designed, requiring coordination between multiple teams, precise timing, and the use of military tactics adapted for urban gang warfare. The warehouse where the party would be held was a large, single-story building with limited exits and clear fields of fire from surrounding positions. I divided our 40-person force into 6 teams with specific roles and objectives. Team Alpha would establish perimeter security and prevent any escapes. Team Bravo would provide overwatch and sniper support from elevated positions. Team Charlie would conduct the main assault through the primary entrance. Team Delta would attack through the rear exit to catch anyone trying to flee. Team Echo would handle communications and coordination between all teams, and Team Foxtrot would serve as a mobile reserve to respond to unexpected developments. Each team was equipped with automatic weapons, body armor, and communication equipment that would allow real-time coordination throughout the operation. The attack was planned to begin at 2 a.m., when the party would be at its peak, and our targets would be least alert, with the entire operation completed within 30 minutes to minimize the risk of law enforcement response. Every detail was rehearsed multiple times using a mock-up of the warehouse, and contingency plans were developed for every possible scenario that might arise during the attack. The psychological preparation for the Great Compton Massacre was as important as the tactical planning, because the operation would require our team members to kill more people in 30 minutes than most gang members kill in their entire careers. I had to convince 40 young men that mass murder was not only justified, but necessary for the survival and prosperity of our organization. The briefings emphasized the threat that the Fruittown Pirates posed to our territory and our families, the opportunity to eliminate our enemies before they could attack us, and the respect and financial rewards that would come from participating in such a historic operation. I used military terminology and concepts to make the operation seem professional and legitimate rather than criminal and brutal. The targets were described as enemy combatants rather than human beings. The attack was called a preemptive strike rather than a massacre, and the expected casualties were referred to as eliminated threats rather than murdered people. The psychological conditioning was so effective that most of the team members were excited about the operation, viewing it as their chance to prove themselves as warriors and earn their place in gang history. I had successfully turned 40 young men into weapons that would kill on command without questioning the morality or consequences of their actions. The night of November 12, 1999, began with the final equipment check and team briefing at 10 p.m., 4 hours before the scheduled attack time. Each team member knew their specific role, their target assignments, and their escape routes in case the operation went wrong. The weapons were distributed: automatic rifles, shotguns, handguns, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. The communication equipment was tested to ensure coordination between all teams during the attack. The vehicles were positioned at strategic locations around the warehouse to provide rapid transportation to and from the target area. At midnight, the teams began moving to their assigned positions, using predetermined routes that would avoid law enforcement patrols and enemy territory. By 1:30 a.m., all 40 team members were in position around the warehouse, with clear fields of fire and communication links established between all teams. The surveillance team confirmed that the party was in full swing, with over 20 high-value targets present and minimal security measures in place. At 1:58 a.m., I gave the final go signal, and 40 Hoover criminals prepared to execute the most devastating gang attack in Los Angeles history. The attack began at exactly 2:02 a.m. with coordinated explosions that destroyed the warehouse's main electrical system and plunged the building into darkness. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. The party guests were suddenly blind, confused, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Team Charlie breached the main entrance with explosive charges, while Team Delta simultaneously attacked through the rear exit, creating a crossfire that trapped everyone inside the building. The automatic weapons fire was continuous and overwhelming, designed to eliminate all targets within the first few minutes of the attack, before anyone could organize resistance or escape. Team Alpha maintained perimeter security to prevent any survivors from fleeing, while Team Bravo provided sniper support to eliminate anyone who tried to fight back or call for help. The coordination between teams was flawless. Every target was engaged simultaneously, every escape route was blocked, and every potential threat was neutralized before it could develop. The sound of gunfire was constant for the first 10 minutes of the attack, then sporadic for another 10 minutes as teams conducted room-by-room searches to ensure that no targets had survived. By 2:25 a.m., the warehouse was silent, except for the sound of our teams conducting final sweeps and evidence collection. The aftermath of the Great Compton Massacre was immediate and shocking as the full scope of the devastation became clear. 20 Fruittown, Peru members were dead, including their entire leadership structure and several allied gang members from other blood sets. The precision of the attack and the complete elimination of our targets exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We had achieved total tactical success with 0 casualties among our own forces. The warehouse looked like a war zone, with bodies scattered throughout the building and evidence of the overwhelming firepower that had been used in the attack. The psychological impact on the surviving Fruittown Peru members was devastating. Their organization had been decapitated in a single night, their leadership eliminated, and their reputation for invincibility destroyed. The broader gang community was shocked by the scale and coordination of the attack, recognizing that gang warfare had evolved to a new level of sophistication and lethality. Law enforcement was equally stunned by the military precision of the operation and the complete absence of evidence that could be used to identify the attackers. The Great Compton Massacre had achieved all of its tactical objectives, but it had also crossed a line that would change gang warfare forever and trigger a cycle of revenge that would consume everything I cared about. The law enforcement response to the Great Compton Massacre was massive and immediate, involving hundreds of investigators from multiple agencies who recognized that they were dealing with an unprecedented level of criminal organization and violence. The FBI, ATF, and LAPD launched joint task forces to investigate the attack, bringing in experts on organized crime, terrorism, and military tactics to analyze the evidence and develop leads. The crime scene was processed for days, with investigators documenting every bullet hole, every piece of evidence, and every detail that might provide clues about the identity of the attackers. The level of coordination and tactical sophistication demonstrated in the attack shocked law enforcement officials, who realized that gang warfare had evolved beyond traditional street violence into something resembling military operations. The investigation involved thousands of hours of detective work, hundreds of interviews, and the deployment of advanced forensic techniques, but the operational security measures we had implemented made it almost impossible to develop actionable intelligence. The case remained unsolved for months, then years, becoming one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Los Angeles history and a symbol of law enforcement's inability to deal with sophisticated criminal organizations. The gang community's response to the Great Compton Massacre was fear, respect, and a determination to develop similar capabilities to prevent becoming victims of comparable attacks. The elimination of the entire Fruittown, Peru leadership in a single coordinated operation demonstrated that traditional gang warfare tactics were obsolete and that survival required new levels of organization, planning, and tactical sophistication. Other blood sets began forming alliances and sharing resources to develop their own military-style capabilities, while Crip organizations sought to recruit their own strategic planners and tactical specialists. The arms race that followed the massacre led to increasingly sophisticated weapons, better training, and more complex operations, as gangs tried to match or exceed the capabilities demonstrated by the Hoover criminals. The psychological impact was equally significant. Gang members throughout Los Angeles realized that they were no longer safe even in their own territory, that their enemies might be capable of planning and executing attacks that would eliminate entire organizations overnight. The massacre had changed the rules of gang warfare, making every conflict potentially existential and every enemy potentially capable of total destruction. The personal cost of planning and executing the Great Compton Massacre was something I didn't fully understand until months later, when the adrenaline and pride of tactical success had faded, and I was left to deal with the reality of what I had done. I had planned the deaths of 20 human beings, coordinated their execution with military precision, and felt satisfaction at the completeness of their elimination. The technical achievement was undeniable. The operation had been flawlessly planned and executed, achieving all objectives with no friendly casualties and minimal risk of detection. But the human cost was staggering. 20 families had lost fathers, sons, brothers, and friends in a single night of violence that served no purpose beyond gang politics and territorial control. The guilt over the innocent people who had been affected was overwhelming, but I couldn't show weakness or remorse without undermining my position within the organization. I had to maintain the image of the successful strategic planner who had achieved a historic victory against our enemies, even as I was beginning to understand that the victory was hollow and the costs were higher than any benefit we had gained. The cycle of revenge that followed the Great Compton Massacre was swift and devastating, as surviving blood sets organized coordinated retaliation against the Hoover criminals and anyone associated with the attack. Within weeks of the massacre, our own members began dying in carefully planned attacks that demonstrated that our enemies had learned from our tactical innovations and were applying similar methods against us. The war that followed lasted 5 years and claimed over 200 lives as both sides escalated their tactics and expanded their targets to include family members, associates, and anyone connected to the opposing organizations. The violence spread beyond gang members to affect entire communities, as innocent residents were caught in crossfire, mistakenly targeted or killed simply because they lived in the wrong neighborhoods. The economic and social impact was devastating, as businesses closed, families moved away, and entire areas became uninhabitable due to the constant threat of violence. The massacre that was supposed to eliminate our enemies had actually created more enemies, more violence, and more death than had existed before the attack. I had achieved tactical success but strategic failure, winning a battle while losing a war that consumed everything I cared about. The psychological profile required for planning mass violence is specific and dangerous, requiring a combination of intelligence, strategic thinking, and emotional detachment that can easily become pathological. You have to be able to think about human beings as objects to be eliminated, to plan their deaths with the same detachment you might use to plan a business operation or a military exercise. You have to be able to coordinate the actions of dozens of people, knowing that their success will result in the deaths of dozens of other people, without feeling the emotional weight of those decisions. The intellectual challenge of tactical planning can become addictive, creating a sense of power and control that is intoxicating but ultimately destructive. I became obsessed with the technical aspects of violence, constantly developing new tactics and strategies for eliminating enemies more efficiently and effectively. The emotional numbness required for this work spread into every aspect of my life, making it impossible to form meaningful relationships or feel genuine emotions about anything except the next operation, the next target, the next opportunity to demonstrate my tactical superiority. I had become a machine designed for planning death, efficient and effective but completely hollow inside. The community impact of the Great Compton Massacre extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families, creating trauma and dysfunction that affected multiple generations. Children who lived in the area developed anxiety disorders and behavioral problems, unable to feel safe in their own neighborhoods after witnessing such devastating violence. Families who had no connection to gang activity were forced to move away from communities where they had lived for decades, unable to cope with the constant threat of being caught in gang warfare. The social networks that held communities together were shattered by fear and mistrust, as residents became suspicious of their neighbors and reluctant to participate in community activities. The economic impact was equally severe as businesses closed, property values collapsed, and investment fled to safer areas. The massacre had demonstrated that gang violence could reach levels that made normal community life impossible, creating conditions where fear dominated every aspect of daily existence. The operation that was supposed to protect our territory had actually made it uninhabitable for everyone, including ourselves. The evolution of gang warfare tactics since the Great Compton Massacre reflects the ongoing arms race between criminal organizations as they try to develop capabilities that will give them decisive advantages over their enemies. The success of the operation demonstrated that traditional gang warfare methods were obsolete and that future conflicts would require military-level planning, coordination, and execution. Criminal organizations began investing in tactical training, military equipment, and professional expertise to develop their own capabilities for planning and executing mass violence. The techniques pioneered in the massacre have been adapted and refined by gangs across the country, making coordinated attacks a standard tool of organized crime rather than an exceptional event. Law enforcement agencies have responded by developing new investigative techniques, surveillance technologies, and tactical capabilities designed to detect and prevent sophisticated criminal operations. The result has been an escalation in both the capabilities and the destructiveness of gang warfare, with conflicts becoming more militarized and more devastating to the communities where they occur. The media coverage of the Great Compton Massacre played a crucial role in shaping public understanding of gang warfare and the capabilities of criminal organizations. The extensive television and newspaper coverage brought national attention to the sophistication of modern gang operations, challenging stereotypes about street-level criminals and highlighting the evolution of organized crime in urban America. The coverage also sensationalized the violence and tactical sophistication, creating a narrative that emphasized the spectacular nature of the attack rather than its human cost. The technical details of the operation were widely reported, potentially providing information that could be used by other criminal organizations to plan similar attacks. The failure of law enforcement to solve the case or prevent similar incidents was extensively documented, contributing to public perceptions about the inadequacy of traditional policing methods for dealing with sophisticated criminal enterprises. The media attention also created a form of celebrity status around the operation and its participants, potentially encouraging copycat attacks and glamorizing the use of mass violence as a tool of gang warfare. Before I finish my story, I need something from you. If this video has impacted you in any way, if it's made you think differently about gang warfare, about the evolution of criminal organizations, about the community impact of mass violence, I need you to share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and most importantly, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe it's someone in your family who doesn't understand how sophisticated modern gangs have become. Maybe it's a community leader who's dealing with organized crime in their neighborhood. Maybe it's a young person who's attracted to the strategic aspects of criminal activity without understanding the human cost. Your share could help people understand the reality of modern gang warfare and the importance of community-based prevention efforts. Your comment could reach someone who's been affected by gang violence and needs to know that healing and recovery are possible. Your engagement helps this message reach more people who need to understand that intelligence and strategic thinking can be used for construction or destruction, and that the choice between them determines whether you become a protector or a predator. I also want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, whether you agree with everything I've said or not, whether my story resonates with you or challenges you. I want to know. This conversation doesn't end when the video stops. It continues in the comments, in the discussions you have with your families, in the choices you make when faced with opportunities to use your intelligence for positive or negative purposes. So please, take a moment right now to engage with this content. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together we can create change that prevents other communities from experiencing the kind of violence that the Great Compton Massacre inflicted on South Central Los Angeles. Share your own experiences with conflict resolution and community building. Tell me about times when you've seen intelligence used for positive purposes, or ask questions about how to help communities recover from organized crime and mass violence. To anyone watching this who has strategic thinking abilities, leadership skills, or the intelligence to plan complex operations, I want you to know that you have a choice about how to use those abilities. The same intelligence that can be used to plan mass violence can be used to plan community development. The same strategic thinking that can coordinate attacks can coordinate humanitarian efforts, and the same leadership abilities that can organize destruction can organize construction. The choice between using your intelligence for positive or negative purposes is ultimately a choice about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of legacy you want to leave. I spent 8 years using my strategic abilities to plan violence and coordinate attacks that destroyed communities and families, and the guilt and trauma of that experience will stay with me for the rest of my life. But I've also spent the last 20 years using those same abilities to help communities heal, to train young people in conflict resolution and leadership, and to demonstrate that intelligence can be a force for positive change rather than destruction. The respect and satisfaction that come from building something positive are far greater than anything I ever felt from planning the deaths of other human beings. My name is Darius, and I planned and executed the Great Compton Massacre, the most devastating gang ambush in Los Angeles history. Today, I choose to be known as someone who uses strategic thinking to build rather than destroy, who believes in the power of intelligence applied to positive purposes, who works every day to help communities heal from the trauma of organized crime and mass violence. This is my story, my confession, and my warning about what happens when intelligence and strategic thinking are used for destructive purposes rather than constructive ones. The 20 people who died in that warehouse were not just enemies or targets. They were human beings with families, dreams, and value that extended far beyond their gang affiliations. The communities that were traumatized, the families that were destroyed, the cycles of revenge that were triggered, all of it could have been prevented if I had chosen to use my abilities for positive purposes rather than planning mass murder. If this video has impacted you, please don't just watch and move on. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts, your story, or your questions. Your engagement helps this message reach more people, and your voice adds to the conversation that can prevent future tragedies. Remember, intelligence is a tool that can be used for construction or destruction, community building or community destroying, and the choice you make determines whether you become a protector or a predator. Thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution. Stay constructive, choose building over destroying, and never let pride or anger turn your intelligence into a weapon against your own community.